Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And our Oakland A's are now two-time defending World Series champions after taking out the St. Louis Cardinals 4-2 in the World Series that finished a couple of days ago, capped off a 120-win season with the title, and we are beginning to prepare for this offseason. Last time around, we did our annual review of our Major League roster and started planning for the offseason. We're definitely going to need to move on from some pretty important players to clear some money off of the books. That being said, we have made a choice on one of the players we were thinking about moving on from since the last episode, the outstanding first baseman / second baseman who can also play third and short and left and right if we really need him to in a pinch, Luis Godina. We have made an offer to him to bring him back. Certainly could have saved around $18 million if he was not back with us last year. But of the four players that we are considering moving on from for financial reasons, Godina with a .310 career batting average, a .153 career WRC plus, and over 19 WAR in less than 4 full seasons in the majors, being a guy who can also play any position in the infield if we need him to, is in my mind the best player and the most value of the four guys we discussed potentially moving on from because of salary reasons last time. So Godina no longer on the list of players we might be moving on from. The starting pitcher Doug Weiss, set to make $15 million next year at the age of 32, and now being wrecked physically, is in my mind the most likely option to move on from. But shortstop Chisa Iwata, set to make $17 million, and then left fielder Darnell Selvey, set to make around $18.5 million next year, are still guys that conceivably we may decide to move on from one or two of them to get our salary expenses, which are currently projected to be 10th in baseball, back in line with the fact that we have the 27th largest budget in baseball. So with that offer out there to Godina, one more decision has been made, but lots of decisions ahead of us. In this episode, we're going to take a look at some of the better young prospects in baseball, check in on some of our former players, then do a deep dive on our farm system and some of the top prospects available. And then we're going to finish the episode off shopping some of the players that we may be moving on from as this offseason gets underway, see who's got more value on the open market, and that could be a big influence in terms of who we decide to bring back, and ultimately also who we're able to acquire in the trade market in the coming days and weeks. So we'll start off taking a look at a few prospects we've been following for years, and honestly, Edison Faulo, certainly not a prospect at this point. The 27-year-old is a proven major leaguer for the Pittsburgh Pirates, 14-8 record with a 4.28 ERA this past year, a 2.5 WAR. Has become a good, solid major league starter, set to make about $5.5 million in arbitration going forward. Probably no need to continue following him that closely going forward. Kazuki Asari, an international free agent signing from back in 2038, has become a good reliever, making his major league debut with the Tigers this year. 7-2 record with a 2.39 ERA over 90 and a third innings pitched. You'll remember we didn't love some of those negative personality traits that he had. I can't remember whether he was fragile back in the day or not, but he is fragile now. But still was a very productive reliever for the Tigers. Fortunately for us, we've got a lot of productive relievers in our early to mid-20s, fighting for spots on our roster already. And last but not least is the potential two-way player Kurt Hall, Warrior, now listed as the number 20 prospect in baseball. Made his major league debut finally with Texas this season. 2-5 record with a 5.28 ERA. Did strike out 64 batters in 59 2/3 innings, but he also gave up 10 home runs. So some solid results and some results that will need to be improved if Warrior is going to be a big-time pitcher going forward. On the batting side, he had 137 major league at-bats for Texas this year, hitting just .219 and 82 WRC plus, 4 homers and 14 ribbies in the 45 games that he did play. So honestly, he's a little bit better than our two-way player that made his debut this year, Mike Homer. And certainly when we look at Hall's profile, I would expect that he is a better pitcher and potentially a better offensive player who looks like he could be a good defender. Hall, if we could pick up a guy like him, would certainly be interesting to add into the mix, but given being the number 20 prospect in all of baseball, my hunch is he's probably going to cost a bit more than we would otherwise be willing to spend. Turning to some prospects among the position players, Alvaro Cepeda, now 27 years old, making big money with the Cleveland Guardians, but he has not developed into a big-time major league player. Really good defensively and nice speed, but the bat is a question, fragile physically, and the personality is what really turned us off on him to begin with. Hit just .206 this year with 16 homers, 49 ribbies, well below average offensive player, but still close to 2 wins above replacement, thanks largely to his defense. Right fielder Alexis Campos, 22-year-old IAFA signing from 2038, spent the entire year in high A ball in the Rays organization, hit .259 with a 94 WRC plus, like the speed, like the glove, and he's a good contact hitter with good gap power. The issue is he doesn't walk, and he's probably not going to hit a lot of home runs, so I think not going with Smooth Campos was probably the right decision for us. You may remember from the draft, free agent, or I guess he was in the draft, but he's already been released. Juan Monsivais is listed as the number 3 prospect in baseball, which is shocking to me. The glove we knew was always there, but the bat does not indicate like it's going to be a major league bat. Yeah, it looks like he was released and played an independent ball last year. Hit just a $161 in A ball. So he has a lot of work to do. Looking at his history, was a 3rd round pick by the Royals. He was released a couple of years after he was drafted in 2041, released in 2043. Signed with Gastonia, and he's the number 3 prospect in the Atlantic League. That makes a lot more sense because he's with the Southern Maryland Blue Crabs now. So I guess technically we could try to bring Monsivais into our organization, but purchasing him for $250,000 would be interesting to bring him along just because of the glove, but we've got very high scouting accuracy on him, and the bat shows no indication that it's ever going to be major league quality. Cameron Rhodes, 25-year-old, we looked at many years ago. His career also going sideways. He had led the National League in triples 2 straight years, but this year did not even play in the majors, played in Double-A Harrisburg, or Hartford, I guess that is, and then into the Independent League. He's a free agent right now. I'll offer him a minor league contract. I don't think he's a big-time player, and he may not sign a minor league deal, but a guy that has won a couple of Gold Gloves, and as I said, led the league in triples each of those years while hitting over 20 home runs. Don't view the profile of him batting-wise as being particularly interesting, but if he's willing to sign a minor league contract and be organizational depth for us, we could certainly think about it. Few younger prospects that we've talked about more recently. Jesus Sauceda, we were talking about in our last episode. He's a guy that we picked up in a big trade where we gave away a very interesting pitcher to the St. Louis Cardinals, who we ended off facing up against in the World Series. We've subsequently traded Sauceda to the Yankees for the young infielder Jim West. We never loved Sauceda's personality, but thought that he did have some potential. Split this past year between A and high A, and was a below-average offensive player at both levels for the Yankees organization. Juan Villa, 21-year-old center fielder, number 45 prospect in baseball. Still looks like he could be an interesting hitter. They're definitely taking their time developing him. Looks like he's been promoted to the Carolina League now, but spent the entire year in rookie ball, where he had a strong season, hitting .306 with a 139 WRC plus. But you would think that they might be a little more ambitious in terms of trying to move him along, given that he's now already 21 years old and still hasn't played a game above rookie ball. And we'll finish off with a couple of higher potential younger prospects that we've looked at more recently. Adalberto Pazias, IAFA signing back in 2041, was not good in rookie ball as a 19-year-old in the Pittsburgh organization this year, but certainly still looks like he could develop into an interesting hitter if things go well. Shortstop Juan Bonilla, another IAFA signing from 2041, still at the I guess he's spent all of his time at the complex, but it looks like they have since promoted him in the Marlins organization from the international complex to their FCL team post the season. So he should get to make his official professional debut as a 19-year-old next spring. And we'll turn our attention now to some of our former Major League players and some of the top Major League players in all of baseball. Steve Genus, who at one point won 7 consecutive Cy Young Awards with Texas, 10-7 this year with a 3.05 ERA, a WAR of close to 6. Still one of the top pitchers in baseball, but our ace Federico Arriola stopped his Cy Young Award streak in 2041, and Arriola now trying to win a third Cy Young Award in a row this year, although we don't think he will ultimately be successful in that. Andy Grimes, arguably the best pitcher in baseball, unfortunately had a injury-plagued season with Washington, 4-3 with a 2.96 ERA, started just 11 games this year, but looks like he is back and healthy and ready to go for next season. Talked a lot about Mike Ramsey a few episodes ago. The Braves traded the brilliant two-way star to the Dodgers right before the trade deadline last year. Led the National League in a number of pitching categories last year as he tries to collect the 5th Cy Young Award of his career. And he also had a pretty impressive offensive season, hitting .332 with 30 homers, 126 ribbies, and a 7.1 WAR, as he tries to win the 8th Most Valuable Player award of his very decorated career. Andres Rojas is a knuckleballer we thought about drafting out of the University of Connecticut Avery Point many years ago. Moved from the Yankees to the Mets this year after the Yankees traded him away right before the trade deadline. Was a combined 15-10 between the two teams, and the Mets made it all the way to the National League Championship Series. We beat them in the World Series in 2042, and they came up just short of getting to a rematch with us this year. As I noted earlier, we beat the Cardinals in the World Series this year. Rojas, now 36 years old, passed the 200 win mark and the 3,000 strikeout mark in his career with the Mets this season. I guess he technically passed the strikeout mark while he was with the Yankees, but he passed the win mark while he was with the Mets. And now we'll turn our attention to some of our former pitchers. Chase Dora, longtime ace or number 2 starter for us, let him go in after the 2040 season when we couldn't afford to bring him back. 5-11 with a 5.20 ERA this year for the Dodgers. Still has the profile that suggests he can be a pretty effective major league pitcher, but certainly coming off of a difficult season and at 35 years old, hard to imagine him improving much at this point. Mike Gallick, a guy we let go this past offseason. You'll remember we thought we were going to lose both Doug Weiss and Mike Gallick. We ended up bringing Weiss back when we thought he was being more reasonable in terms of his demands and let Gallick hit free agency. And Gallick ended up signing for less than we had paid Weiss, even though he was telling us he wanted a lot more. Gallick 10-7 with a 5.28 ERA for the Mets this year. So the now 30-year-old, when we look back at his major league career, certainly his time with Oakland with the 124 ERA plus and the 96 FIP minus was a very successful portion of his career. Also had some good years in Boston, been a bit less successful since he's moved on from us the second time with teams like San Diego and the Mets. Joe Lewin still is a guy who highlights the worst trade we've ever made, at least in terms of generating negative WAR. Finally moved on from Philadelphia to Toronto as a free agent this past offseason. 11-5 record with a 4.03 ERA, put up a 1 WAR on the season. The 30-year-old was used both in the rotation and out of the bullpen for Toronto. Still looks like he can be a useful major league starter, but his days of making all-star teams, which he did in 2037, are likely behind him. A couple of more recent departures. A year ago, or I guess 2 years ago at this point, we said goodbye to Chuck Huntley. He spent this year with the Mets organization, sometime in AAA, and at the majors he put up a very ugly 7.48 ERA over 49 and a third innings pitched. Huntley was our closer for a while, eventually priced himself out of our Oakland roster, something we seem to be experiencing every year. Been out with a herniated disc since the beginning of the playoffs, still injured for another couple weeks. Would expect that he will be healthy in the not too distant future, but definitely making a lot less money than he was making when we decided to move on from him a few years ago. And another guy who was most well known as a starter for us, but similar to Huntley, also spent some time as our closer. Jesus Saldana, our former ace, who came back from a very significant injury with his stamina completely shot. Had signed him to a contract that we thought was going to be very valuable as a good solid starter for us, but as a reliever was more than we could afford to pay. So we traded Saldana away last offseason. Exactly a year ago today, actually, is when we moved on from Trey Saldana. He did start 4 games for Colorado this year, but was primarily working out of the bullpen. 5-9 record with a couple of saves, 4.18 ERA over 64 and 2/3 innings, and barely above replacement level. So I think it was definitely a good decision for us to move on from Saldana. Had some outstanding years for us, led the American League in games started 3 straight years before the injuries really started to derail his career. Won double-digit games for us as a starter 4 years in a row, and led the American League as a rookie with a glittering 1.95 earned run average. Put up some really nice years for us, largely as a number 1 or number 2 starter for us, but as I talked about, just could not justify the salary he was making once it became clear he was a reliever. and fortunately we chose to move on from him a year ago. Turning our attention to a few position players, former catcher Jorge Mendoza, who we moved on from when Jonah Richards was ready to become a star, signed a massive contract with Boston, and he bounced back from what was a poor year for him a year ago when he hit just 248 with a 92 WRC plus, got the batting average up to 272, only 9 homers this year, but still put up a 113 WRC plus and a WAR of close to 4. So a very productive season for Mendoza for the Red Sox, but still doesn't compare to some of the really good seasons he had with us in his late 20s with Oakland, peaking with that 6.1 WAR for us in 2041, the year after which we let him go. We've already talked about Mike Ramsey, so no need to visit him more. The brilliant two-way player. Alejandro Landin, longtime infielder for us, now 33 years old and wrecked physically, played just 55 games for the Angels this year. Was productive with a 118 WRC plus in that really small sample size, but this is another guy who looks like we moved on right at the right time. He had been hitting 15, 20, 35, even 40 home runs for us over the bulk of his career. On the final 16 in his final year with us in 2041, and only 12 home runs in the 2 years since Landin left Oakland. Byron Brain continues to be a strikeout machine, now a backup catcher for the Marlins. Hit a .190 in 153 at-bats with 5 home runs and 79 strikeouts. Brain, with 3,056 at-bats in his career and 1,554 strikeouts, has struck out in more than half of his major league at-bats. Not surprisingly, his career batting average is below the Mendoza line at a .91. Amari Alcindor is a player who we had good hopes for, who we moved on from this past offseason. Traded him away a year ago today to Colorado. Got an opportunity to be more of an everyday player with the Rockies. Started 109 games, played 122 overall, and still basically ultimately ended up with a Amari Alcindor season. 251 average, 95 WRC plus, and a 2 WAR. You may remember that over his time with Oakland, he was basically on average over 162 games, about a 2 WAR player. So nice to see him finally get an opportunity to play more regularly. But given the young infielders we have in our organization and the fact that Alcindor is going to be making more and more money over the next few years, I think it was still the right decision to move on from him. And speaking of guys who we potentially moved on from at the right time, last but certainly not least is the franchise Jake Ortega, who split last year between the Yankees and the Angels organizations. The Yankees traded him away right before the trade deadline to the Angels. Unfortunately for Mr. Ortega, injury issues continue to derail what once looked like a potential Hall of Fame career. Played just 33 games this year with the Yankees and Angels after playing just 33 games for the Yankees a year ago. Wrecked physically and very difficult to keep him healthy. His first year away from us, played 107 games with the Yankees in 2041, but as I mentioned, just 33 games in each of the past 2 seasons. Put up a 122 WRC plus this year in the 119 at-bats that he had. Stole 11 bases. Still a productive offensive player. But at 36 years old and being wrecked physically, it is looking increasingly unlikely that he's going to even reach 2,000 hits in his major league career. Definitely not going to get to 300 home runs He'll probably get to 200. The question is whether he'll have any chance of getting to 250. Not going to drive in 1,000 runs over his career, I would think, given the health issues that he's had. And getting to 400 stolen bases at this point, probably going to be a challenge for him unless he has a couple of very healthy seasons very soon. So sad to see what the franchise's career has become. The injuries have just really destroyed him. And this was a guy who was a 3-time world champion with our Oakland A's and a 2-time MVP. Led the league in WAR on a couple of occasions, stolen bases on a couple of occasions, including his last year with us in Oakland. But the injuries had already started taking a toll in his final years in Oakland, and we ended up moving him out of center fielder, using him a lot at DH or corner outfield positions, even first base from time to time to try to keep him healthy. And clearly the teams that he's played with now over the last 3 years have found out that it's difficult to keep the franchise healthy, unfortunately. And after taking a look at some of our former prospects who have become proven major leaguers and some of the more interesting prospects around baseball, many of whom we either didn't draft or didn't make IAF or FA offers to, we'll turn our attention now to the prospects who are in our organization. And although our minor league system ranking has been volatile over the last season and a half, I think we've been as low as 21st. Right now, as the offseason gets underway, we rank 3rd out of 30 teams in terms of our farm system. And I don't ever recall seeing this before, but when you look at the top 20 prospects in our organization, every single one of the top 20 prospects in our organization is ranked in the top 200 in all of baseball. So 10% of the top 200 prospects in baseball are members of this Oakland A's organization. So I was talking in the last episode about how important I think that good coaching and big investments in scouting and player development are, and certainly the way that our minor league system looks right now supports potentially investing as much as you can in those things when you are playing the game yourselves. And given that we've got 20 prospects in the top 200, we'll briefly visit all of them and talk about how they did this past year. Our top prospect, shortstop Juan Moreno, picked him up in a trade with the Cardinals back in 2041. Split this year between A ball and high A ball. Was very good offensively in A ball, about average in high A. Combined for 18 homers and 59 ribbies at the two levels, with 20 stolen bases. Really like the glove, really like the speed. Question is how well his bat is going to develop. Not even 22 years old yet, so still has an opportunity to get better and better. And certainly the left-handed hitting middle infielder could be helping us in the majors, maybe as early as September call-ups in the 2045 season. Another shortstop who's moving along in the organization, but still probably a few years away from helping us, is Gabe Kimball, who we picked in the first round in 2041. Split this year between rookie ball, where he hit .336, and then we did promote him to A ball, where he struggled a bit, hitting just .212. But he did have 7 home runs in 165 at-bats, put up a 103 WRC+, and was still well above replacement level. Not quite the same kind of glove, but potentially an even more interesting bat than Moreno has if Kimball reaches his full potential. Talked about Nelson Romero in the last episode. He made his major league debut for us this year, and certainly in the mix to compete for playing time as either a starting infielder or a utility infielder at the major league level next year, depending on how the rest of our roster looks. Jerry Stevenson, another guy who made his major league debut with us this year, started the year in high A ball and made it all the way up to pitch one game for us at the end of the year. He was a combined 15 and 8 between high A, double A, triple A, and the majors. Don't necessarily see Stevenson becoming a superstar, but the former 7th round pick is the number 40 ranked prospect in baseball and does look like someone who, if we have some more injury issues in the starting rotation next year, could certainly fill in as a 4th or 5th starter for us at some point. As I mentioned, was roughed up pretty poorly in his one outing in the majors, giving up 10 hits, a walk, and 2 home runs in 4 2/3 innings. But you look at his profile and you look at his performance, and I think it's certainly reasonable to think that he could be a respectable major leaguer in the not too distant future. Last but not least, a guy that we traded for last offseason, Edgar Alarcon, the number 42 prospect in baseball, went 7-3 with a 2.81 ERA for us this past year in rookie ball. Doesn't necessarily look like a future superstar, but think he could certainly be a very good number 3 starter and maybe even a 2 starter if he reaches his full potential. So 5 of our top 200 prospects are in the top 50 overall. 4 more who rank in the top 100, led by Mike Mercer, first-round pick of ours in 2041. Started the year off in rookie ball where he was 2-0 with a 2.20 ERA. Promoted him up to A ball where he was not as good, 1-4 record with a 5.11 ERA. Gave up a sickly 17 home runs in 56 1/3 innings pitched. Still think he can become a pretty interesting player for us looking at his profile. Ultimately, we're going to need to build up his stamina if he's really going to become a starter for us. So that's something that we'll likely be working on in the coming seasons in the development lab. Arturo Anguino, you may remember him, our IAFA signing from almost 2 years ago, number 57 prospect in baseball, and he had a very strong introduction to pro baseball in the DSL this year, hitting .334 with a 129 WRC plus for our strong DSL team. 2 final prospects of ours in the top 100. Right fielder Devin Carrick made his major league debut right at the end of the year. Talked about him in the last episode. 24 years old. We still think he can develop to have above average home run power, but at his age, getting a little concerned that that may never actually happen. And the 9th and last of our top 100 prospects, another guy who made his major league debut this year, the interesting-looking left-handed reliever Roque de la Paz, Prince of Slider, IAFA signing from 2039, was okay in Double-A for us this year, and then he was absolutely outstanding after we promoted him to Triple-A. 3.38 ERA in a very small sample size of 2 2/3 innings at the major league level. But he did strike out 5 batters and certainly will be competing for a spot on the major league roster coming out of spring training next year. He is only 21 years old now. He'll be 22 by spring training. Still has 2 option years left, so could end up in the minors, but if we do move on from some of our more expensive pitchers, particularly relievers, that could make it easier for Roque de la Paz to make the 26-man roster in April. And as we've talked about, we've also got 11 prospects ranked between number 101 and number 200, led by DeAnthony Bramblett, the 113th ranked prospect in baseball. Split the year between Double-A and Triple-A, combined for 25 homers, and was a well above average offensive player at both levels. I think the right-handed hitting first baseman could certainly be a contributor at the major league level. Decent speed, a very good bunter. Doesn't bring a lot to the table defensively. Tend to think he'll be somebody who we either have as a spare infielder on the team for a few years when he's making the major league minimum, or he's also someone that conceivably we could include in a trade in the coming years if we can bring somebody on board that we think could be more impactful. Vasco Espreguera, you may remember him, another IAFA signing from 2041, made his major league debut in the DSL this year. Hit just 239, but did have 11 homers and 55 ribbies and 276 at-bats. Still think that his home run power could potentially be quite impressive. We'll see how he continues to develop. Luis Rangel, the third baseman, made his major league debut this year, was the MVP of the Pacific Coast League, and certainly in the mix to be on the major league roster for us this coming year. Similar story to Nelson Ramiro for Rangel. Could be fighting for a starting spot or could end up in more of a utility role. It's also conceivable, depending on what happens, that one of those guys begins the year in AAA, but you'd have to think at least one of them will be on the major league roster. A couple of starting pitchers now. Juan Misquez, 8th round draft pick from 2040. Only 1-1 with a 3.19 ERA in rookie ball this year. 21 years old, still has that outstanding fastball, and think that he'll likely be promoted to A ball next year. Ricky Tobin was our supplemental first-round pick this past year. Only a 2-4 record as a starter for us in rookie ball, but did have a 2.81 ERA and 11.7 strikeouts per 9 innings. Obviously, at only 18 years old, has a long way to go before he's ready for the majors, but still think that Tobin's got a pretty high ceiling, and hopefully we can do a good job developing that. Kadir Noyle, former second-round pick in 2038, is a guy who could be in the mix to help us at the major league level in the not-too-distant future. Put up a 148 WRC plus this year in Double-A ball, hit 32 home runs. Really like his defense in the outfield. He could also even play second base in a pinch. Really good speed. Question is how well, how quickly, and how highly will his bat develop. Been a very productive offensive player the last 3 years in the minors, but I think he's still a bit off major league quality. Hopefully the 23-year-old can continue improving a bit over the next couple seasons. And our final 5 prospects in the top 200 are all ranked between 183rd and 198th. Jeremy Wright, you may remember him, first-round pick in 2039, split the year between high A and double A, combined for 32 home runs at both levels, put up a combined 5 WAR. Don't necessarily see him being a superstar with this bat, but still think he could be a very productive offensive player for us. We've been training him a bit at first base this year, but looking at his ratings, still have hope that he can be a good defensive outfielder for us wherever he ultimately ends up in the majors. Catcher Tawase Zuabri, IAFA signing from 2040, split the year between our ACL team and our A team. Hit 349 in the ACL a year after hitting 357 in the DSL, so had nothing more to prove at either of our rookie teams, but he certainly struggled a bit when we promoted him to A ball. Hit just a $199 in 191 at-bats. But he did have 12 homers and 30 ribbies and was ultimately still an above-average offensive player. Like his glove, can live with his arm. The big question is how much his bat will continue to improve. Clarindo Moreno, an IAFA signing from 2041. Split the year between the DSL and the ACL, 4-2 with a 4.91 ERA in the DSL, and then he was 1-6 with a 4.78 ERA in the ACL for us. Doesn't necessarily look like he's going to be an ace, but certainly still has a profile that we hope means he could be a useful major league starter when all is said and done. Center fielder Ben Prince, a 6th-round pick from 2039, split the year between A ball and high A, and he was very productive at both levels. going to be turning 23 before the next season begins. Definitely could envision him playing in Double A and possibly even in Triple A next year. Looks like his bat is not far off major league quality at this point, with still some room to improve. And another outfielder with pretty good range who we think could be a solid defensive outfielder and maybe compete for some playing time in center field down the line with the likes of Armstrong and Aguiar at the major league level. And last but not least, the young catcher Luis Covarrubias made his major league debut with us this past season. And as we talked about last episode, we expect the outstanding glove of Covarrubias to become our backup catcher at the major league level for this upcoming season. And given that his glove is so good, we're going to perhaps look for some opportunities to give our starting catcher, Jonah Richards, a little bit of extra time at DH or possibly first base to lower the wear and tear on him a bit, and also take advantage of Covarrubias and his outstanding blocking and framing skills. So we're feeling pretty good about our farm system 20 seasons into this playthrough in Oakland. Still have some guys on the way to help us at the major league level. Before we finish off this episode, did mention that I wanted to take a look at the markets for some of the players that we may be looking to move on from this offseason. I'll probably spend a fair amount of time offline between now and our next episode and likely be simming forward a couple of days, hopefully making some trades, certainly shopping some other players to try to reshape this team and make it cost less money and hopefully still be close to as effective as it has been at the major league level. The player that I think I'm most likely to want to try to move on from, who's making some money, is Doug Weiss, a guy who's been in our organization for over a decade at this point after we picked him in the 4th round out of Austin Peay. Going to be 32 before next season starts, and he's wrecked physically, looking to make $15 million a year for the next 2 to 4 seasons. And given that we only got 3 games out of him in the regular season at the major league level, I just think there's a lot of risk in keeping him around. Don't know what the trade value is going to be at this point. We had looked at Weiss back before the trade deadline, and it seemed like there was a fair amount of interest in him then, even when he was hurt. So the hope is now that he's healthy, there still may be a bit of demand for Mr. Weiss. And it definitely looks like there are a lot of options to trade for Mr. Weiss straight up. Experienced major leaguers, young guys with lots of potential, definitely a lot of potential value there. Certainly when you look at the upside, the second baseman, Gilberto Alvarado, stands out. Boy, he could be exactly what we might want to look for if we decided to move on from both Weiss and someone like Chisin Iwata this offseason. The 24-year-old Alvarado still making the major league minimum. Batted just .229 for the Cubs this year, but did have 28 doubles, 15 homers, stole 12 bases. Put up an 80 WRC plus a year after putting up a 138 WRC plus in 247 at-bats when he made his major league debut. Alvarado, not really as good defensively as we would prefer for a middle infielder, but good speed and a potentially very interesting bat if he continues to develop. It's good to know as we start thinking about what our options are that Doug Weiss does seem to have a good amount of trade value if we decide to move on from him, try to bring someone on board who might be a little younger and healthier. I don't necessarily think we're going to move on from the arbitration-eligible outfielder Darnell Selvey, but still interesting to see what the market for him looks like, and even more interesting than the market for Doug Weiss. Not surprising. Start offering people a 27-year-old outfielder in the prime of his career who's still got 2 arbitration-eligible years, and definitely going to be a lot of interesting options available. So certainly a lot of value there. We've talked in previous episodes and certainly in the comments with some members of the Worldwide Scouting Department in recent days about potentially trying to bring on a young starting pitcher if we make a trade. Wally Hurst, 26-year-old, looks like he could certainly be a very interesting pitcher to bring on board. 2-1 with a 3.23 ERA for Houston this past year. The concern with Hurst is he's already fragile physically, and he clearly missed some time with an injury this year. Do love that captain personality when he's healthy and in the rotation, and he's done incredibly well for a former 19th round draft pick. But I think if we were to give up big-time assets for a pitcher like Hurst, we actually wouldn't mind if maybe the stuff on a pitcher was a little less, as long as the injury proneness was also less. But certainly a lot of value out there if we wanted to move on from Darnell Selvey. Shortstop / second baseman Chisin Iwata, another guy that we could conceivably move on from to save some money this offseason. And Iwata looks like another guy, probably not quite the same kind of demand as we saw with Selvey, but it looks like it might be a little higher than the demand for Mr. Weiss. We talked a lot last episode about Dan Jorgensen, the starting pitcher that we had traded away to St. Louis several years ago, and what ended up being one of the potentially poorer trades that we've ever made. And if we were to move on from Mr. Iwata, we could get Jorgensen back. Jorgensen set to make $4.2 million this year, but the 26-year-old is now a proven major league pitcher. He is also normal in terms of his injury proneness. Not the greatest defender defensively, and he would continue to weight our starting rotation more and more towards lefties if we brought him on board. Don't know that we're ultimately going to move on from either Iwata or Selvey. Don't even know for sure that we're going to move on from Weiss, but clearly they all have some interesting trade value. Unfortunately, Weiss, the one who we're probably most likely to move on from, not surprisingly, being the oldest and being wrecked physically, also has the smallest amount of trade value. And we'll finish things off checking in on 2 more guys that we could potentially shop this offseason. Ron Markley, the backup catcher who's set to make over $4 million next year, almost certainly will not be back with us next year. We talked earlier about Covarrubias taking over as our backup catcher. So if we can get any value at all for Markley and get that contract off the books, definitely something that we would consider pursuing. You can see some of the similar names here, but certainly not as deep a market for Markley. That being said, there are definitely some young guys arbitration eligible, or not yet arbitration eligible, making the major league minimum that we could pick up for him. So good to know that there's a little bit of value out there in Ron Markley. And last but not least, we will check in on Jonathan Shearer, the outstanding reliever who's set to be making about $6 million next year, given the depth of our bullpen at both the major league level and, importantly, in AAA. Think that spending $6 million on Shearer is potentially a luxury that we can't really afford, and the market for Shearer is also relatively deep. Doesn't look like there's necessarily stars that we're going to get in return for him, but he certainly does have some value in the trade market. So the good news for us is we will be starting to prepare for the offseason offline in the coming days is that a lot of the guys that we're considering moving on from have some pretty significant trade value. I don't know that ultimately we move on from either Iwata or Selvey. Would have to be a blockbuster to move on from either of those very important bats in our lineup. But even Weiss, Shearer, and Mr. Markley all have value. Dave Baumler, Phil Swenson, also guys that we could potentially be moving on from in the coming days. So we do have some potential options to get our budget, to get our payroll better aligned with the budget that we have and ensure that we can continue investing more heavily in scouting and player development going forward. So between now and the next episode, I'm going to spend a lot of time thinking about those things. Hopefully we'll have a couple of trades to report on by the time we get to that next episode. And if you've got any thoughts on what we should be considering in the trade market or otherwise, always helpful to hear from the members of the Worldwide Scouting Department. Until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.